My name is Wijnen. I'm a director at Finprov Learning. I'm a former senior partner at Ernst & Young and at Deloitte, focusing on setting up and reorganizing international supply chains. Today I would like to talk to you about international expansion and the factors to consider. First one I'd like to discuss are the strategic goals and the purpose of your company. So are you there to help humanity and looking after the planet? So being an entrepreneur with social and sustainable impact. What about scalability? Is your business scalable around the world, and what should be the best regions to cross over into other jurisdictions? And one of the other elements that people consider is profit. So is profit first? Do we take a holistic approach with international expansion and all? Then the familiarity of the offering. What I've seen in the past is that companies being successful in one country run into trouble in other countries, and one of the reasons is the familiarity of the offering. So what are you actually selling? Are people in the country already familiar with similar products, or is it new? Do you have to educate your market? And I'll take two examples. One was Philips, the electronics giant from the Netherlands. They, a few decades ago, tried to introduce coffee machines into Japan because they thought it was a mature market which could sell those machines rapidly. What they forgot was that there is no coffee drinking culture. So even though they shipped a number of machines to Japan, the sales were disappointing, and they had to rethink their strategy in order to get into that market. The second example is ice cream, Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola. If you travel the world and you taste the same brand in different countries, you will see that those companies have changed the flavors to the local liking. So in one country it's a little bit sweeter, in the other country it's a little bit more flavorful. Those are the elements you also need to consider for your products and services. Is it easily to understand? What does the packaging look like? What is the description that fits it? And last but not least, which I'll get into a number of times, is multimedia. Also the competitive landscape in that context is of importance. Are you the first into that country, or is there already a market leader? Because that also requires consideration of pricing policy, supply chain policy, etc., finding partners in that country and looking at, okay, what should my price be to have a sustainable market in the future. Then we look at brand recognition. Your brand may be big in your country, but is it already known elsewhere in the world? And what we see in modern times is that with multimedia and people that are social influencers, your products can fly rapidly around the world. Paris Hilton is an example. The Kardashian family is an example of influencers that can either make or break a product. And the most mature influencer is someone like Oprah Winfrey. Whenever a product was being discussed in that program, there was an enormous demand for that product, which brings you to another issue you need to consider, and that is, where is the place of manufacturing, what is the place of where I render my services, etc. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Is your brand a potential franchise, like McDonald's does around the world, or will you set up your own organization, and how do you look at a country to conquer? If I can speak for what I've seen with US and European multinationals getting, for instance, into China, but also into India. If your approach is we want to be at the same time throughout the country, then you may run into roadblocks from a actual fact, because it is difficult to get your products around the country. If you, however, first focus on the major cities in the country, you will find that from there you can build the brand and build your market faster, and then with landing in one or multiple cities, you can develop your strategy going forward. But bear in mind that some of the countries also have their trade barriers that you need to overcome, permits, etc., which we'll also talk a little bit later about. Then we get into the market landscape and the research. So what is the current market environment in your sector, in the new market you're focusing on? Like I said before, are you the first into that market? Is it a new product, an existing product, an enhanced product? Sometimes, like Steve Jobs of Apple said, people don't know they want the product, so why should I ask them in panels whether they like my products? I do the right marketing, launch it, and then by the early adapters that will then trigger, say, further sales. Is the economy that you're getting into in a better or worse shape than your country is in? Because that may drive pricing, it might drive market approach, it might drive your customer base, and it is an important factor to consider, because otherwise you spend marketing dollars and research dollars in the wrong way with not those high results. What about the competition? Is there already a competitive landscape? Are your products and services easily to replicate? Are there patents on it? Is it easy to use? Is it open source? Those elements also determine how you need to set up your organization and your products and services flows. Some companies now say, okay, go to the internet, you can download quite a bit on either a mobile phone application or in another way. But that is also where you then need to look at local regulatory environment. What about the product life cycle in the markets of focus? Product life cycle, if you look at CD players, they were once state of the art, now no one uses them anymore, and effectively your mobile application has taken over. So looking at where is the landscape now, what are countries doing around the world in terms of your product and service going forward, and can you jump on that bandwagon or not? The geographical distance and trade barriers. If you have manufacturing plants in your country and you want to move into another country, you have to identify, okay, how do I bring my products to the customers, whether it's business to business or business to consumers. Are there logistics carriers that I can use to bring my products? What mode of transportation do I need to use? Is it by truck, by ship, by plane, other ways? Because that's going to drive your cost, but also the service level into the country. So getting that wrong may end up with a huge demand. Like I talked before, if you have a social influencer, that suddenly spikes your demand, but there is no logistics flow determined to get it to your clients, and there may be an issue. And linked to that, which we'll get into the finance section, how do I fund it? Because there's a lot of working capital out there related to the products you're going to sell. And how do I collect the money? What currency do I trade in? Things like that. Also, the trade barriers in terms of pricing. If I take, for instance, meat and poultry getting into Europe, because Europe has its own dairy industry, meat industry, etc., they are protecting their trade. So if I look at, for instance, multinationals that came from Brazil, there were trade barriers because they would just price up their products until it was competitive in Europe by levying import duties and things like that. So then you need to have a very efficient supply chain to still look at your overall cost. And in bigger terms, whether your total manufacturing capacity is used in the best possible way, your logistics capacity is used in the best possible way, so to still maintain your competitiveness. Could you franchise your solution, like McDonald's does throughout the world? And there's other examples. Even the Apple stores, they're not all owned by Apple. So then it's just setting up your franchise locations, training your franchisees, and finding the appropriate model to generate revenue and profit out of the franchise organization. And at the same time, you need to protect your brand. You need to avoid replication, like sometimes they do in China, where they just copy your brand colors, your exterior outings, with just changing a different name. It is important to consider that. Cultural understanding and marketing. If you don't understand the culture of a country, then the way you bring your products to the market may not gel into that country. If for instance, there is an indirect method of communicating, like you see more in Asia, or a direct method of communicating, which you see more in the US and, for instance, the Netherlands, that can make a huge difference in how you market your products throughout the geographies you're looking at. You could look at, okay, do we want to engage with actors or marketing people from our own central location, or do I tailor it with local actors or influencers so that there's an immediate recognition as some product that they should go for? Then the business language is important. You need to look at, okay, what partners or what entrepreneurial organizations are already in that country. Could I become a member? Could I learn from that organization on how business is done in the countries? There are also booklets available and online to see doing business in a certain country, what elements to consider. I strongly advise you to look into those things and not just go in blind, because then you may spend a lot of money but not getting the return you're looking for. Then in terms of setting up the business, do you do that with a local partner? Do you do it greenfield, so you start your own organization? What I've seen in the past with companies from India and China is they send out their sales reps to do business deals. Once the business deal was in, then obviously there needed to be a contract. The contract would trigger setting up an own organization. The own organization would trigger the human capital side of things, the logistics side of things, etc. So you need to consider what makes sense first to do, because if in the end you sell but you can't deliver and you get the wrong reputation, then that may also be an issue. Key context, so get to know the people, see who are the driving factors in creating business in the country, and see whether you could link up with them either in a partnership or hiring them as consultants could be a very wise thing to do. Co-working spaces may also be a topic. What we see more and more around the world is that you have office sharing companies where you can just rent an office or a space, and because there are multiple entrepreneurs in that same space, there is a network environment from a natural perspective, whereby if you drink coffee or tea or have lunch, etc., you could then team up with them to make the first strides into the country. Then do your policies and procedures and marketing approach require local flavor? That is also something you can do your homework on or learn by experience. It is critical because sometimes if you use your local domestic approach and try to export that to other countries, it may not work. So focusing on someone who's known in the country, who's willing to endorse your product or service, can also make the difference. And that could also be a hipster who's big on YouTube, on Instagram, or on other multimedia elements. Human talent and language requirements. One of the elements you need to consider is whether you would fly in your own people to build up the organization, whether you would recruit local talent, and what is, say, the requirements you want from them to make it successful, to kickstart your business, and also the languages that need to be spoken in order to make it work. Sometimes you just communicate through multimedia, through commercials, television, sports events, etc. But sometimes you also need to have a local person approach the market, build the trust that your products and services can make the difference, are beneficial for the markets they're intended to. So also take that into but also take into account the cost of your local presence. So if you fly in people from your own organization, look at the cost of housing, look at the cost of taxes versus hiring a local one, so that you arrive at an optimum level of what should be hired locally, what should come from your central organization, or what you could recruit from your competition. We also need to look at the operational aspects. So where do you set up your manufacturing? Where is your warehousing? What is your service level? Do you work with logistics companies? Do you work with the UPSs of this world, or the FedExes of this world, or the DHLs of this world, to get your products to businesses and consumers? It's all very important to take into account, because once demand starts, you need to be able to fulfill it. And if it results in failure, then that failure will be noticed, and you will effectively see that backfire on you on multimedia. It's like a first date. There's only a first impression, and that first impression needs to be really good. Product localization. So is your product universal? Does it need to be localized? So if you sell, for instance, electrical equipment, is the voltage the right one? Are the power plugs the right ones, etc.? You need to consider that before you actually start shipping your product, so that there is a seamless introduction of the product in the local market. The impact of e-commerce. So do you set up your website centrally but with a local flavor? How do they feed into your logistics network? Do you have central warehousing, regional warehousing, local warehousing? Is that outsourced? Do you do that yourself? All factors to consider. Linked to your products is services. So is there a software component to it? Is there a services component to it? And if there's a services component to it, do you set up your own organization? Do you tap into service organizations that are already available in that country? It's those type of things that are very important to take. Then finance and compliance. Clearly getting your products and services across the border, getting the right taxes on it is very important to also get your pricing right, because if your margins and your consumer price are not right, then ultimately your international expansion may not reap the results that you were looking for. So doing your homework there, and also tapping into local companies who can assist you with, again, those booklets, Doing Business In. Those will take you through business culture, through tax compliance, through regulatory compliance. Sometimes your products first need to be registered in a country, need to be approved by either a regional or a domestic government agency, and only then you can sell your products going forward. So again, doing your homework before you enter into the country, or finding a local partner who's already done that and can help you scale up quickly is very important. Another element is funding, currency and cash flow. You can have a very successful business, but if your trade terms are not set up the right way, then a lot of your cash flow may be tied into your working products, into your trade debtors. And if you then don't match, say, your creditor payment terms with your debtor payment terms, taking into account also the warehousing and logistics component of it, you may be successful but ultimately go bankrupt because you can't get the funding right. So setting it up the right way, either funding it from your own organization or through banks, that way may really help you in setting up your international business the right way from day one. So deciding to expand your business in an international environment isn't easy. It is definitely doable. I've been advising companies on that for the past 35 years, and there are organizations that can help you going forward. For instance, the Netherlands have got this Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency that basically both looks at the domestic requirements to set up a company, but also they help Dutch entrepreneurs setting up their international business in other regions. And I can imagine that within your country you have a similar organization where if you link up to them, it will work out fine. Yeah, last but not least, evaluate. Don't get on a running train and look at where that train is going, what speed it has, and whether it is in line with, say, your own goals that you set going forward. Right? So if something happens, find a reporting mechanism, find an adjustment mechanism so that you can adjust on a timely basis to then tweak your international expansion the right way. With those words, for now, I'm gonna close. Obviously, there will be many more of these sessions, but I wish you the best, and I also encourage you to look at international expansion, because now it goes quicker than, say, 20-30 years before. There are a lot of specialized companies that can assist you going forward, but also there you need to know what you're looking for. You need to find your business requirements, define them, communicate them to the companies that can help you, and then also ask proposals to do a right evaluation to take the next steps. Local business partners may be the right way to go, but there is also international trade organizations in your country that you could hook up to. And there are frequent trade fairs going there, even though we're in COVID-19 Corona territory at the moment. Business is opening up, and if you take the right precautions, you could have a flying start going forward. With that, good luck, entrepreneurs, and until the next time.